All right, hello everyone and welcome. It is so wonderful to have so many of you here today and some old friends in the audience and some new friends. And it's just wonderful to share virtual lunch with you today. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Gergel and I serve as the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion for the Faculty of Forestry here at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I'm just one of several people who's involved in bringing and creating events like this today. So I'd like to start by recognizing that, so this is a UBC Forestry event hosted by UBC Forestry. And because we're at UBC, in Vancouver, we're situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish peoples. Because this is a UBC Forestry event, I also wanted to mention that right outside our building every day, we see the reconciliation pole, which if you haven't been by our building, I encourage you to come see that. It's a spectacular piece of artwork, a spectacular totem pole that was designed and created to really recognize the profound damage and role of the residential school system and the role it played for Indigenous people in what we now call Canada. And seeing that every day outside of our building, I think it really reminds us that the important role we have as educators in creating spaces that are open and supportive for everyone. And so that's kind of the spirit and the idea behind this webinar series, our virtual lunches in the forest, which the idea here is to bring some fresh perspectives and some new voices to the issues that don't get enough attention perhaps in conventionally in forestry and conservation sciences. So that's what this webinar series is all about. I will remind you of one technical thing for today. Please use the Q&A button. So please don't use the chat. Please keep your questions and comments to the Q&A button. That will help us stay organized today. And with that, what I'd like to do is hand it over to the person, the amazing person who really envisioned the structure of these lunches and has really brought it all together and set up the whole thing. And that is our fantastic Estefania Mila Moreno.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Today, Dr. Yemi will join us to share his experience and thoughts around forestry as a space for Black people. Thank you so much for joining, Yemi. Let me share with you all a bit about Yemi. Dr. Yemi Adeyeye has a decade of experience that cut across advisory roles with international and intergovernmental organizations, management of multi-stakeholder initiatives, and interdisciplinary research activities focusing on the intersections of power, people, and spaces in resource governance. His work portfolio covers experiences across the different regions of the world. He recently completed his PhD at the University of British Columbia. And during this time, he joined the Diversity Crew. He also the Public Scholar Initiative and the Liu Institute for Global Issues. He's currently the director of the international network, Young Professionals for Agricultural Development, EPARD. Yemi, we're gathering around lunchtime, so I'd like to welcome you and start with this question. What is your favorite dish?
Hi, Estefania. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much, Sarah, for the invitation. And the food I like most is called jollof rice. I'm sure a lot of people who had been to, say, the West of Africa can relate. It's a very popular food that people make in their household or in during ceremonial events. And you could eat it with chicken or different kind of meat or fish or whatever. It's made from, of course, primarily rice and then tomatoes, bell pepper. It usually has this red seasoning that, for an average Nigerian, you can tell the scent of rice 5 kilometers away, where you can tell if there's a ceremony. We also actually have different ways by which we define it. We call it rice for, what's it called, for say burial ceremony. There's a rice for wedding ceremony. There's a rice for birthday, because you can always tell the scent that it gives. Yeah.
Amazing.
I encourage everybody to try it out. You can actually check it online as well, jollof rice. There's also a sort of a debate ongoing that never ceases to exist between different West African countries about who makes the best jollof rice. Nigerians try to say we do, Senegalese will say we do, and Ghanaians will also, bring this up. It's an interesting conversation, but jollof rice, yeah, something that is worth trying.
Can you get that spice here in Vancouver?
There is this Afro-Caribbean store where you could get the real spice, like the spice that will give you the taste, the real taste for it. If you go to all these conventional stores, you might find one thing or the other, but I've tried, and I've realized that there are differences between what you get. I would suggest you go to any Afro-Caribbean store or African store. You'll likely find something like that there.
Amazing. So Yemi, you prepared a presentation to share with us to help us guide the conversation. So please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Thanks so much for having me. And this topic is quite an interesting one. It's also quite topical, actually. And when Estefania reached out to me, I was wondering, okay, this is a topical issue, but to what extent can we discuss this within a short period of time? The interesting thing about it is that I'm sure that everyone listening right now had got into some kind of conversation regarding the situation of Black lives and Black people in contemporary society, in different spheres, in politics or whatever. But here I would try to, so my intention is to frame that conversation in such a way that we can have some hopefully interesting insight and exchange within the next few minutes. Before I go ahead, I think it's also important for me to tell you who I am and why what I'm going to be saying is going to, where it's coming from. So I'm a Nigerian, and I studied my bachelor's in Nigeria, had a polytechnic degree in Nigeria, both in forestry. I did my master's in the UK in forestry, another master's in Denmark in forestry, a PhD in Vancouver in forestry, and I've done research in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America as well. So to a particular degree, I've engaged with different kind of people, different forestry practitioners across different continents. So I've also been engaging with different platforms where conversations about forestry take place. Forestry people, forestry professionals, imagine issues, challenges, or whatever. And I've, to a large degree as well, I've had conversation with colleagues who had, been interacting with other fellow people in also these different spaces. I guess my point is that I'll be bringing forward as much as I can my own story and the stories of colleagues and friends I've met along the way. And to frame this conversation, there are two strands, two angles that I'm trying to take here. So I'm trying to look at it from the aspect of how forestry is beginning to be dominated, or over time increasingly dominated by white culture, whiteness, what I call elitist forestry, and how Black people are becoming increasingly invisible in those conversations, or when they are visible, the visibility are particularly framed by some certain situations or people who are gatekeepers of who gets to access those platforms where people get to interact on these issues, or people get to be active participants of discussions in forestry. And then on the other hand, I would relate that to how Black people feel, or how Black people might feel, how Black students feel about all these things, how Black practitioners are feeling about these things from the conversations I've had and the stories I've listened to. And so to go, before I discuss, before I speak too much about this, I want to bring something to our attention, because you will see that come up again and again as we go down, that when you want to lie, just stay close to the truth as much as you can and you find. And that seems to be one thing that the society continues to reinforce and continue to support. And that depiction of that, of this phrasing, and a good illustration, it's seen visibly in forestry. It's when you think about Black people or Africans or people of color or indigenous communities in forestry, there's a particular subconscious illustration that comes up in our mind. People who are beneficiaries of forestry or direct beneficiaries, people who are particularly maybe poor, people who need our help, people who perhaps don't know how to show forward their concern. We seem to forget at every turn that there is a gap between concern and actions, and those who are able to take those who find themselves in those two different things. And the difference is about access. How much access do people have? What are the functions of gatekeepers, who are those who are controlling those access? And this is it. And I tried something 2 days ago. I was trying to get some illustrations for this talk, and then I checked something. You may not see it properly. I just tried forest and livelihoods on Google, and I see a lot of Black faces and people of color, indigenous people. Basically, an illustration that these are the guys who are in forest, who are dependent on forestry. Basically, this is what you see. When you check forest professional, forest scientists, professors, and so on, this vision you see that is on the other side. One is completely illustrative of Black people and people of color, indigenous communities, people who need help, and then the other one basically is whitewashed. And this illustration, this is something that we teach in class. This is something we perpetuate without us knowing. I mean, there's something in the contemporary discourse about poverty porn. It's something that shows off more prominently in research, in practicing, in discussion, in policy discourse about people who need others. The people who need others are usually the Black people. And the people who seems to want to save others are white. And then we forget that these roles are interchangeable on many occasions. In many instances, you need those Black folks to save you. And to not be too confrontational, we will be in any case, because this is a very, very confrontational topic, and that's just what it is. That's the reality. There are roles for faculty members. There are roles for forest policymakers. There are roles for different, for people who occupy different spaces. There are roles for students and colleagues. And there was a time I was talking to some of my colleagues in FU. I asked them, have you noticed that everybody who works in forestry, in the intergovernmental organizations, in global spaces, are either Caucasians or Black people who have had to imitate whiteness, people of color who have had to imitate whiteness? It's very rare for you to find, it's a couple of us who had to go to study in Europe, we've studied in America. You rarely find someone who studies in Kenya all your life lecturing on global forest politics in many universities around the world. If you give me one, I'll give you 20 of those who have had to imitate whiteness. And those are the kind of injustices we don't recognize and we rarely talk about them. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that we continue to have a situation where Black people have to represent themselves in a particular way to be able to access, to be found qualified to access what everybody else gets without having to try too hard. Basically, an average Black student have to try 5 times more before he gets access to, say, an internship that another colleague, someone who is Caucasian, would get easily because of the name they bear. I've spoken to my colleagues or friends right now who are graduate students who would say, I had to write 20 professors before I get one reply. And I've never spoken to any of my white colleagues who had to do the same. And it's not because they have a different profile, it's this issue about the illegalization of Blackness that's filled the contemporary culture, the invisibility of Black excellence, the fact that sustainable forest management movement and conservation movement, the faces of them are illustrated with whiteness.
Yemi,
yeah.
would it be different if we had Black faculty members?
Of course it will be. I mean, I wouldn't say it will change everything, but what I would say is that, again, it's all about illustration, right?
Mm.
It's about what people see. If you continue to use the same illustration to tell a story, in time, the illustration will become the story. If you continue to show or make visible that whiteness or imitating whiteness is legal, is the only legal thing, is that you get access, is those who are leaders in forestry, is what makes you qualified, then you get people, you get a particular kind of faculty members. But if you start to have a bit of a diversity in the faculties, you show that there's justice here, there's an opportunity here. If you are this thing, you can be this thing. Then it becomes an illustration that is visible for others. For example, someone once told me recently, someone of color said, I don't think you can be a faculty member in this university. Why? Because they've just never done this before. So I'm not even gonna try to apply. So that's what that means, because it's never happened before. Yes, there's a need for someone to break the glass ceiling, but why should that person have to fight that hard? That's the injustice that's there. That's a gap that need to be filled. That's a role that demands the attention of all of us, especially those who are gatekeepers. We all know we all sort of have a position in the gradation of access control. A lot of us are gatekeepers of different things. So it's a call to attention to be more aware of what are the bias, subconscious bias that frame how we evaluate who has the right to access a particular opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Our evaluation of who should be a faculty member, for example, and how we decide. I mean, if someone goes to this top university in this country, then they can teach tropical forestry. I mean, I've rarely seen in many international universities, you have tropical forestry teachers are not people from the tropical environment. Our practitioners in global forest politics are skewed towards the north, having conversations about things that take precedence in the south. And then employees in the south are employed on a daily situation to contribute the knowledge that matters, and those who get praised for it are the full-time staff who reside in the north. So these are gaps across from academics all the way to practitioners. And I think we've spoken a lot about what it means for Black people, but I'm just gonna say that in faculties and in universities and in places of work, and there is this situation where young Black students seems to have a more blurry future of their placement in the sector than otherwise. And it's as a result of this feeling that I don't belong. I have to struggle really hard to find a small place for myself, or no one sees me, invisibility of Black identities, or that I have to really be white. I gotta be white. I mean, we we make a joke with some of my friends about some of my friends from different places around the world about we can be 10 different people within 5 minutes. We got trained to do it. I can even up to the stage of how we speak. I mean, my accent can transition depending on who I'm speaking to. Is that it has gotten to that level where for Black young people, to young professionals especially, we embody, multiculturalism is interesting, is a good discourse, is something that should be promoted, but there are some kind of injustice undertone to it. Multiculturalism, the insurgence, I will call it, of multiculturalism is connected to the need for some people to look like others. Multiculturalism never refers to someone with power or with someone with history of privilege. Multiculturalism refers to those who are usually more often relegated, but they need to be something else and be multicultural and be able to speak different languages while their own language is never recognized, by the way. So this is where multiculturalism comes in from. So this is what Blackness is all about in the global spaces where whiteness is the gatekeeper of access, and where Black people have to imitate whiteness to exist and be visible, and where the injustice that is quite prominent, no one talks about them, no one recognizes them, and it continually get perpetuated by everyone who has had history of subconscious attendance to what matters. And I think this conversation right now, I hope it helps spark this reflection where, for example, for faculty members, what can I do differently? How do I access the emails I get could be a very good starting point. Like, how do I interact with Black students? One of my colleagues, and one of my friends who is now a graduate student told me that, when, there was a conversation between different faculty members, one saying, I don't want to get this student, the other saying, okay, I will pass this student to you or something like that. He's Black. And does it really have to be that difficult? Do we really have to try that hard to do something that could be simpler? And I believe, actually, that as far as forestry is concerned, there is a high degree of respect for forestry faculty members and researchers. And turning a little bit down home, I would say a faculty like Forestry UBC commands a lot of respect internationally. And I think if anything is going to change as far as the makeups of faculty members, the interaction with students, the diversity that exists, the attention to equity, I think it has to start with Forestry UBC. I think there's an opportunity for us to look at the problem and really want to solve it, and not just because we want to talk about it alone. Someone like me, I finished at UBC and I'm very proud of it. I had a very supportive, my faculty members, my committee were very supportive of me. And there are also some people like that who have had supportive faculty members and who have had supportive supervisors and so on. And equally, there are many who are struggling, who want to try really hard so that they feel they're accepted. Because they speak a bit differently, or because they And there are some of these guys that speak already 6 languages. And they have to, and because they're not feeling confident in their ways of communication, or in maybe their writing is not the best right now. But I mean, the point is there's an opportunity for supportive framework for both students, for new faculties, for new positions, and for things to become more a consideration of equity. And I hope that that can happen through GBC Forestry. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I will invite you to perhaps stop sharing the presentation. I don't know if there is one more picture.
No, it's it. Thanks so much. That's it. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening to the Rant of the Black Man. Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, give me one sec. So, well, I think that you've touched in many of the things that we were hoping to cover. You know, I am interested in asking you, I know that your research, the PhD in the Faculty of Forestry, is about participation and representation, in this case in Bolivia with First Nations. I wonder if you know, that theme seems to very much connect with what you share now, like how do you ensure fair participation policies? Is that right?
Yeah, there's this correlation between, I mean, it's like a north-south thing, and some people have a classification like BIPOC, like, you know, Black, Indigenous people, and people of color. There's this thing about it's unfortunately in global agenda and arena, it seems to be a white versus Black thing, a white versus people of color, a white versus non-white situation. And there's also an offer on those kind of platforms. I mean, those kind of platforms is supposed to represent spaces for collaboration and spaces for practice of equity, for illustrations of equity, and so on. But these are also the spaces where you see more visibly how, you know, whiteness is the gatekeeper or the de facto criteria for access, and the degree to which you reach whiteness, the more access you get. There's a clear illustration across from faculty to teaching to research to practicing to, there are many examples out there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm sure. And Indigenous people, they're having a big brunt of that as well. It's a thing.
So you were in forestry at UBC around 4 years, and I wonder, from the time you came to the faculty and the time you left, did you see any change in the demographics in terms of Black students representation, Black faculty representation?
Thanks so much for the question. It's something that I've actually, there is this strong awareness within myself internally, in my conscious self, about the transition, what I noticed in the Faculty of Forestry from when I came in 2015 to, you know, when I'm living now in 2020. When I came in 2015, it was, I was the only Nigerian student. And there is one guy from Ghana and his partner. Those were the people who were like, you know, Black graduate students when I came in. And by the time I got to, it was like 2 years after, there was one Nigerian, and then 3 years after, 6, 4, 5 Nigerian. And then, so now it's like we have a couple of Nigerian graduate students at UBC, and a couple of others, basically. They sort of gotten better. And I didn't do it. It's not my fault that how many Nigerians came in, but So it was just it was an interesting transition. I mean, there are many kind of assumptions that can be made about why that happened. There are so many assumptions. If I look at it from the aspect of familiarity, we can say is an assumption that, you know, it is Black Nigerian in faculty, and then maybe, you know, people got familiar with the Black student from Nigeria, and then everybody else went. Or because also we have a population, we have a population to justify it. So if you get 20 applications from Africa, you are more likely to get a lot from Nigeria. That could also be an explanation. And it could be a combination of that and everything in between. And so that is a positive change. And I think for sure, for UBC Forestry is sort of transitioning from that in that aspect. And I hope that continues to happen, especially because what UBC Forestry teaches, a lot of them are global topics. And if we continue to teach global topics and interest on tropical environment and conservation, then it is expected, or it is equitable for such teaching curriculum and those who are participants of this curriculum to reflect the reality of what is being taught. From the aspect of faculty, I think there's a lot to be done about that. I really think something needs to happen from that on that end. And the good news, people are listening, and hopefully someone who has access would use that access appropriately to make sure that becomes an obtainable outcome.
Before we move on to the questions that are starting to come, and I have a few more with me, I'd like to ask you what made your experience as a Black student in forestry, you know, more bearable, easier, and what did not work? Or what would you like to have seen? So you've touched a little bit about this with the gatekeepers dilemma and who's actually accepting students. But if you can, you know, tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, where works, I was a fortunate grad student, like despite the overall big frame of limitations that exist for Black students, I'm lucky to have a supportive faculty. I'm lucky to have a supportive supervisor. I had good conversations with Shannon, argument concerning my goals, what I want to achieve, and so on. And to a large degree, we had a very good relationship, you know. And I think within my small cocoon, that helped, right? But on the larger frame of being a Black student in such faculty and or in the university in general, it what work. The thing is, I think I accept my privilege because I think right now I'm not characteristically the average reclined or subjugated Black student. I've transitioned through different phases of educational experience, work experience before I came to UBC. So basically, I have imitated the hell out of whiteness, to be frank, because I had to pass through life that way before I got to UBC. So that in itself is a kind of a sublime level of injustice where I'm basically a different version of a Nigerian to enjoy being a Nigerian at the UBC Forestry.
Wow.
So I'm basically a different person, not like in a way inherently. And whether it is forced, whether it is induced, whether it's because of experience or history of perpetuation or whatever, that is the reality. I'm not an average Black student, and because of that, it works for me, right? But that does not. Then the question is then, how does that relate to someone who does not have my experience or someone who does not come from where I was coming from? You can imagine. I mean, I think you can imagine what the answer to that will be. There are a lot of other younger colleagues who are, struggling to be visible in forestry. And they are trying, and I think that is not just. They shouldn't have to try that hard. And we need to not talk more about that. We need to do something about that. You know,
Yes.
we need to,
Yes.
faculty members need to legalize Blackness. To you need to legalize being from the South, being a person of color. It needs to be okay. It needs to be acceptable. It needs to be encouraged. I mean, the positive side of the story that has to be told. There are positive side of that story that we need to connect more with. We need to recognize that these guys, for example, they actually know a lot more about tropical forestry than someone else. No one talks about that. We need to realize that, you know, one interesting thing on a general way that I think makes having Africans and people of color engaged in tropical forestry or in forestry dialogue in general is that we have a complicated relationship with forest. We like it, we hate it, we nurture it, we destroy it, we eat in it, we worship it, we have cultural significance to it, it's connected to our history. That exactly is the reason why you don't do forestry without Black people. Because then within the context of that sophisticated and complicated interaction are insights that need to be drawn from, conversations that need to be had, things that help us understand why things happen in the tropics the way they do.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Yemi. It's very powerful, and I feel like there is a lot of talking about how, you know, UBC supports the Black community, but there is a piece of accountability that is still yet to come. So I'm gonna pass to the questions that they're sending in the audience. So one is one thing or a few things you would really like to see in the forestry community in the, you know, close future. What would represent a good change to you?
Okay, firstly, faculty members need to reflect the reality of thematic areas in forestry. Secondly, there needs to be a support framework for aggregation of people of color and the interaction of those people with others. In the sense that there needs to be more of a socio-cultural environment. Call it a club or something that is integrated into the educational system, where there are more open spaces of interaction between Blacks, people of color, and the other international students, to have to discuss in a non-framed, completely framed way what constitutes their experience. How do you manage that? How do you interact with each other? I think having that, for example, I think this could be connected to the diversity and equity platform in forestry, for example. There needs to be a better support of this group whereby that kind of interaction can continue to happen. Both broadcasted interaction and in-house small interaction, different degrees of interaction where different Black students, depending on, or different persons of color, depending on how confidence level or interaction level that they want. Maybe they don't want to speak to 5 million people. Maybe they just want to talk to 10 people. To have this kind of interactions and support this kind of interactions to happen. So I think that will represent a very good change. And also another thing that will represent good change is it would be nice to not hear the story from Black colleagues coming in, how they had to write 20 professors before they got one. It would be nice for faculty members to not just ignore those emails and then be happy to read one from John Smith, for example. It would be nice for faculty members to actually pay similar attention that you'd have paid if it was someone else getting in touch with you. So if it's a Black student, if you don't have space in the lab, but when it's a white student, immediately there's a space. So we need to, as faculty members, you need to be more conscious of why you feel the way you feel and the bias, and try to deal with that and actually be confrontational of why you feel the way you feel and then deal with it. Yeah.
Thank you, Yemi. How does the paradigm of what constitutes forestry perpetuate these inequalities? What would need to change in how forestry is conceptualized to help overcome this?
That's a very good question. And I think what I just said before would relate to it in a way. Another thing is, you know, the picture I showed the other time about forest and livelihoods, and then forest scientists and professionals on Google. You know, we might want to blame Google, but the honest truth is that Google functions based on data that is available and on preference of consumers. So which means there's definitely the preference out there to showcase and highlight blackness and people of color in a particular way, and then whiteness in a particular way in forestry. There are people who are perpetuating that, whether in the illustrations, the way you communicate your research, the way you search for functions, what you record from the internet, what you then reproduce back to the internet. So when we discuss forest livelihoods in class, maybe you should not just show someone from Burundi who is suffering in a village, because there are equally people who interact with forest in many different ways in the north as well. So let's sort of reframe the illustrations we use. Let's illustrate better visions of different places and different people. Let's be conscious of how these illustrations may perpetuate different lives which are closer to the truth.
That makes me think that a good place to start, just in a small way, would be to check the website of the Faculty of Forestry and other universities and see what are we presenting. I know that there has been a change, and now they're showing even more female scholars that they were also lacking, but especially Black students and Black scientists need more spaces. So there is another one. While being a Black student, did you at some point felt that you had to try harder than others to stand out? I think you did mention this. So I will go to the next question. There are many. So how can educators create safe and supportive environments for Black students and assure Black students that they don't have to perform this whiteness that you say that you had to succeed?
First of all, in the design of the curriculum, a better reflection of diversity in the way we open up scholarships and positions and funding opportunities, the way the criteria are framed in itself should not be limited to some particular people with some particular identities. Mm-hmm. Because if you frame a particular scholarship need as so, basically saying this person needs to come from Oxford, without even saying it alone, yes, it's already limiting. You don't have to say it, but the way you frame the criteria could show that intellectual production of science and research, it doesn't matter, but rather the naming of where someone produced this particular outcome matters. So different things like that. So when your intentions on how you go about aggregating people in the classroom, how you allow people. I deliberately use allow because we are gatekeepers, and it's okay to just accept that that's what it is right now. So the way you allow people to have access, the way you grant those access to people, be very wary of that. So that's how you change your classroom. Change your classroom by those who are engaging, how you discuss your topics, how you allow people of different ideas and identities to collaborate within the classroom with each other. You know, the design of extracurricular activities, the person is teaching themselves how you teach and what characterize the different person teaching the different topics on different issues as well.
Yeah, I feel like you made me think on, you know, this excellence hope that you see everywhere in many universities that is so factoring so much privilege. And so I think that what you just said, it makes total sense. And I'm going to ask you one question from Jaylin. It says, how is forestry inaccessible to Black disabled youth? Are there any Canadian forestry companies currently looking into making the job more accessible for disabled Black workers?
Okay, that's a very good question. And sometimes when I think about this question is a good pointer to the understanding of the different rankings of privilege. And sometimes when you think you are not privileged, then you just realize that, okay, I'm even better off. Because imagine you being a person of color, because the intersectionality of privilege and ranking of privilege is quite something that a bit disturbing. Because if you imagine you're black, then imagine you're black and then you're handicapped. Imagine you're black, you're handicapped, and then you're gay. So I don't even think I have the competencies to answer that question, because for sure, it's definitely even more difficult for people, for anyone who has who needs support to do what normal person would do, without different kind of support or whatever, and then it gets more difficult depending on your own individual experience. So in forestry, I think it's I would just say it's kind of difficult. I can't even imagine how I can bring nuance to my answer, because it's I mean, the last chat we had for the virtual lecture, it was by a lady who spoke on this, right? And
Yes.
I think the answer to this question will come from overlaying the insight from her discussion and mine, because you being a black person, you needing support, and overlaying that, and that's where the answers lies. So there's definitely a lot of attention that needs to be brought to that as well, to support people of the need support across the different forms of identities, and then people of color across the different forms of identities as well. Ranging from indigenous groups to Latinos and so on, and everyone who requires kind of an attention to their experience, whose experience have been made invisible. So all these different forms of identities need the support of gatekeepers.
Thank you, Yemi. Let me pass to the next one. With much of global forest in areas where people of Afro descent live, how does the misrepresentation of Black foresters impact forest governance within these areas?
Anders, can you come again with the beginning of the question?
With much of global forest in areas where people of Afro descent live, how does the misrepresentation of Black foresters impact forest governance within these areas?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, I'll just try to paraphrase first. Is that given the size of forest areas in the south, because usually most of the forest in the south, in places like Congo Basin, the Borneo area, the Brazilian Amazon, and so on, there are basically sort of the geography kind of intersect with where people of color are at. So how does having Black identity shape or inform governance at that level? Yeah, so for that kind of answer to that question, we bring attention to the different skills of governance depending on the governance skill we are talking about. If we're talking about local scale, then we are talking about tribal contest and ethnical contest that may happen, and how different degrees of debate and contestation at that level could shape the way the forest is managed. A good example of, okay, before I talk about the example, a second level could be saying the regional, how regional related politics shape governance of forest. Now, the attention to forest, if seen as a global common, which it is, makes every discourse about forest, brings attention to the discussion about different identities and how different identities may inform the way a forest is governed. Less so about how politics at the more local level occur. Because because they don't occur in isolation, and even when they do, they are usually shaped by those global policies that are borrowed from global agenda or global targets that shape or lead to the kind of contestation that happens on the ground. So a good example is the Brazilian situation with the Amazon, when it was
Yes.
last year, 2 years ago. There are internal politics for sure, but at the same time, there are regional politics about what should happen to the Amazon and what Brunissero, I'm not sure.
Bolsonaro.
Bolsonaro is policy about the management of the Amazon and how that conflicts with the international targets for climate change, and how some areas should be conserved, and how he asks the question, okay, if you ask us to conserve this forest, well, come and pay for it. You know, like so I think it's actually it's one of, I remember talking to one of my friends because I was in health office in FAO when this was happening, and we had this conversation about some believing, okay, Bolsonaro, oh, he's so wrong, others saying, yes, he's so right. But it's an interesting illustration for this particular question, in the sense that in some aspect, he is right, whether we like it or not. The reason is because, in my opinion, is because he has to deal with local politics, local need, local economics. As far as a state government is concerned, a state office is concerned, the local economics cannot be relegated. Where resources come from, how it is used to meet the need of people, the infrastructural need, and the livelihood need, and so on, needs to be met. And unfortunately, we live in a highly capitalistic world where money speaks. You know, you need to pay for things. Unfortunately, that is what it is. And if it needs to pay for things, it might need to use some resources to pay for those things. Now, that's at the national level. But when you look at it from the global politics, or the global common, in the sense that this forest does not just matter to Brazil alone,
yeah,
then it becomes a different conversation entirely. And the issue of how that conversation happens, who get to dictate what should happen and what language are used and who participating in those conversations becomes quite important.
Yeah.
So it's a contested question, a contested answer as well, but just some insight from me.
Contested lands. There is another one. How do we transform the academic canon? How do we overcome challenges in citing more Black scholars and academics, but also organizers and activists?
Good question. I can almost imagine who is going to be asking that question, because it's a very good one. Yeah. Okay, so different things. Look, I'll just say my thoughts in different ways on different things. And I mean, I'm open to having further conversation about that. Okay, one, I would say there is a politics about publication processes and outlets. Even though there's this thing about what's it called? Blind review processes.
Yes.
Immediately, yeah, review processes, because of what the picture I showed before in terms of invisibility of Black scholars, invisibility of Black people in the global movement, the perception of Black people and Black scholars and Black wherever, somehow, from what some people have said, shape how fast some productions of some paper written by some Black scholars had passed through a review process. When within the content of a paper, people are speaking about interaction with scholars in Uganda, doing research in Ungo Forest in Kenya, and so on, that shows things from the global south. The way people see it is different from, research collaboration with the University of Oxford or Cambridge, and scientists from Yale and so on. There's this perception that it's just like a research product from a particular kind of scholars are better. So in that sense, in highly, placed journal, whereby the metrics are also defined by, whiteness, in those kind of journals, there's a particular kind of papers that fly through and that get published. And because of that, you see more, less Black scholars publishing in those kind of outlets. And by so doing, you see more availability of products to be cited coming from the other hand versus the other hand. That's the first. The second is that there are different ways by which scholars in the South perceive reproduction of knowledge.
Yes.
There are a lot of Black scholars increasingly talking about different forms of putting out knowledge, storytelling, videos, and community setup. Personally, one of the best defense I've ever attended at UBC was from Karena, Borona, Kenti, Gloria.
Yes.
Our defense, the methodology was, I mean, she sang how the song that was used for the meetings and so on during the defense. It was one of those defense whereby I was almost blown away, But then how do you produce that in papers? Where do you start? How do you translate that into a system where conventional modes of knowledge reproduction overrules? So I guess one thing that can be done about that is for scholars who are privileged to back those scholars who are saying, let there be different modes of publishing, of publishing research knowledge, of putting out things out there, and then let's give those knowledge a heightened level of validity as well.
Yeah.
Because that could help.
We're closing soon, but before, I think that we can do this last question. What is your advice to Black students on how to navigate the barriers and stereotypes as they strive to break the glass ceiling?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's good. On the one hand, Black students shouldn't have to break a glass ceiling. And this is one of the things I'm calling for. Professionals and faculty members, Black students shouldn't have to break the glass ceiling. We shouldn't have to have earned 50 scholarships before we then appear to be able to come to UBC. So we shouldn't have to have gone all over the whole world first before we can come to UBC. And because someone from, say, Germany doesn't have to do the same. They just have to go to a university in the village in Freising, and then they are qualified to come to UBC. So my point is, for that shouldn't have to happen, the first thing. The second thing for Black students is that, be open to new experiences as well, be open to having conversation with people, share your ideas, and also find a sort of, find the peaceful way of protesting inequalities. Like, there are always peaceful ways to do that. Have dialogues with people when you see it happening, and speak up when you have the opportunities to do so. And I always encourage people that there is strength in community. Like, if you realize that there is a problem for a particular setup or in a particular setting where you're trying to gain access, come up as a group, make your need known, and maybe that you can get some attention for that topic. And also, students should, for a sort of a different settings of, say, of this group of diversity and inclusion group, that people can form as many of that as possible, have it in different faculties, lead those particular kind of movements, use it as a platform to share your insight and connect with other people, and keep being yourself. Hold on to the originality of being an African as much as you can.
We deserve, and everyone deserves to be themselves.
Yeah, indeed.
Well, Yemi, thank you so much on behalf of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion initiatives. And I think there is a lot that we can process from this conversation. And that's the hope, that this doesn't end here, but this is the starting point. So with that, I just want to invite everyone to the next webinar that is about parenting in the Faculty of Forestry. And just thank you so much, Yemi, for sharing with us. And Until the next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much, Isham, Sarah. Thanks so much for organizing. I think this platform is one of the best things that's come out of forestry as a, as a unit for aggregating people and sharing opinions about contemporary topics. So thanks so much, and I'm happy to be involved.
Bye.